Front page of the Mirror today talks about the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. She's set to announce a new crackdown on what she terms are tax dodgers in a bid to help fund the NHS. So that's all the good bit. Who are these tax dodgers, and where are we going to get this money from? Let's go to James Murray. James is the Shadow Financial Secretary. James, how much of this money is floating about, and who are these tax dodgers?
Yeah, well, we know that there's up to £6 billion which could be got from a greater focus on compliance and efforts on tax avoidance. That's what the head of the National Audit Office said earlier this year. And so we're setting out our plans today to crack down on that tax avoidance and to get that money into the public purse. Because, you know, when people right across Britain are paying more and more tax, we think it's wrong that a minority are getting away without paying what they owe. And so that's why we're setting out our plans.
I want to know, do they owe £100, £1,000 or £100 million? I'm just sort of trying to get who these villains are.
Yeah, well, one part of our plan is to remove the loopholes which the government has left open for non-DOMs in their plans to follow our lead and close the non-DOM tax loophole this year. So, as you may remember, we've been setting out for a number of years about ending non-DOM tax status. The government said they wanted to follow our lead after years of saying they wouldn't. But they're leaving open loopholes in that, which means that people can avoid paying hundreds of millions of pounds of tax. So we want to close those loopholes. But that's part of a broader approach to investment in HMRC to improve compliance. And, you know, one of the areas where it's important to focus, for instance, is on some of the larger businesses where they will have tax affairs which are more complicated, where the sums of money we're talking about are greater. And so that's a really important place to focus efforts to make sure people and businesses are paying the tax that they owe.
It was so easy to claw back this money. Why didn't you announce it before? Isn't it simply that over the last 4 weeks, you and effectively your boss, Rachel Reeves, and the team in the Treasury have been desperately trying to plug a black hole that's been blown into your sums by the Chancellor when he decided to use your non-DOM tax policy?
Well, we've long set out our ambitions to take on the tax gap and to make sure that people pay their fair share of tax, that people pay what they owe. We set out for a number of years about how we wanted to close the non-DOM tax loophole. You're right to say that after years of opposing us, the government U-turned and followed our lead. But the government has still left holes in their plans. They've still left loopholes, which means that non-DOMs will get away without paying hundreds of millions of pounds of tax that they should be paying. So we set out how we would close those loopholes as part of our wider efforts to improve compliance and crack down on tax avoidance, because that's money that we're owed as the taxpayer and should go into the NHS and breakfast clubs as we set out.
Well, James, we were talking about this earlier in the programme today, and I think everybody's in favour of the idea that if you are particularly a massive company, a big company, whether you're Apple, whether you're Amazon, where, you know, I don't know who to name on this, but the idea seems to be that they can come here, they can set up business, they can give lots of jobs to people on small salaries, but they themselves avoid paying the big bills. Now, the argument against you on this will be, if you make life difficult for these big employers, they'll simply go elsewhere and we'll lose out on the jobs.
Well, there has been a piece of work over the last few years about some of those large multinationals making sure that they pay their fair share of tax. And we've been pushing the government to take action on that as part of a international deal to make sure that we end that race to the bottom, because otherwise what some large multinationals do is shift their profits round to areas where there are lower effective tax rates and avoid paying their fair share. But this is a broader piece we're talking about here. So this is about making sure that right across the board people pay the tax that they owe. And, you know, we know the vast majority of people in Britain are not just paying taxes, but paying more and more taxes. You know, the tax burden is set to be its highest in 70 years. And so particularly in that context, it's not fair that a minority are not paying what they owe. And that's why we believe this is an important time to focus efforts on closing that tax gap and make sure everyone pays their fair share.
How would Angela Rayner fare under this tighter scrutiny of tax affairs?
Well, Angela Rayner has been under scrutiny in the media recently. She's answered all the questions. You know, I'm confident she's done nothing wrong.
Why won't you publish her legal advice?
Well, that's a personal matter for Angela. You know, what we're saying is that if you look at what the Conservatives are doing in office, they are making sure there are loopholes there for non-doms to continue avoiding paying hundreds of £millions of tax. And I'm sure, you know, they're happy to talk about someone in the Labour Party to try and distract attention away from their record in government. But what I want to talk about, what I'm interested in making sure we're setting out, is our plans to close those loopholes worth hundreds of millions, billions of pounds over the next Parliament to fund our public services.
But you must see that it's ironic that here you are talking about trying to clamp down on tax loopholes and tax avoidance, and there are questions in the public domain, not least that have been published by the Mail on Sunday and other papers in recent weeks, her own photograph seeming to contradict her own version of events. We've got the Tory party chair saying out this morning, that, Richard Holden, that this is highly corrosive to the reputation of your leader, Sir Keir Starmer.
What I think is, what is absolutely hypocritical and awful, James, is a lot of these accusations are coming from people who are non-dom, who are outside and who may be in a position where they're dodging hundreds of millions of pounds that could be taxed. And, you know, what is the worst case scenario with Angela Rayner? She owes £1,000 or something. You know,
but the point is, she could be our future Deputy Prime Minister, and if she doesn't have to pay the taxes that she's owed, why should any of us? This is a legitimate question of somebody who's very likely to be in a very significant position of power in this country.
Well, there have been plenty of questions put to Angela in recent weeks, and she's answered them. I'm confident she's done nothing wrong. But, you know, as Eamon said, there are hundreds of millions of pounds, billions of pounds over the next few years, which non-doms are going to avoid paying because the government are, you know, in broad daylight, leaving open these loopholes so they can avoid paying their fair share. You know, we've been talking about the unfairness of non-doms not paying their fair share of tax for years and years. The government have been opposing us, you know, tooth and nail. Finally, they U-turn, but they leave a gaping loophole, which means that hundreds of millions, billions of pounds over the next few years will still be avoided because of the loopholes the government are leaving open for those non-doms.
OK, James, we're going to leave it there. We'll hear from the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, today on what she's got planned. But thanks for highlighting things. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.